Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the newest album, the collaborative album between Tim McGraw and Faith Hill, called The Rest of Our Life. Well, this is a bit awkward, mostly because there's absolutely no way I come out of this review looking remotely good, especially given the rather complicated circumstances behind how and why this album got made. See, I would put money on the vast majority of all of you knowing who Tim McGraw is. One of the most consistent hitmakers in mainstream country for the past 20 years and counting. You know this guy. But if you don't know your recent pop or country history, you might not know that his wife, Faith Hill, was arguably even bigger than he was, especially at her peak in the pop country crossover boom of the late 90s. Seriously, she's sold over 40 million albums and has had top 10 hits on the Hot 100, not just the country charts. Even if you didn't like a lot of her music, in the era of easy listening power ballads, she was absolutely huge. And yet, that was 15 years ago at least, so where the hell has she been? Well, it's tough to put your finger on why the hits kind of dried up, but I'd argue it's a confluence of factors. She took a break from touring when she had a baby, so momentum kind of sputtered. She did some acting as well. Her release schedule became more scattershot, but I would put more of it on the changing trends in pop and country. In the early 2000s, country got a lot rougher and a lot more lyrically charged, and if the pop divas found it hard to transition to the R&B era without getting an edge, adult contemporary leaning artists like Faith Hill found it even harder. I've criticized Tim McGraw for making some very sedate country music, but with Faith Hill, the polish was even more pronounced. Shania Twain, she at least had a little bit more rollicking energy. She was more comfortable in that lane, and even that would dry up in the face of stiff competition like Miranda Lambert and Carrie Underwood and Gretchen Wilson. And when Taylor Swift showed up a few years later and pushed country's innocent side into territory that trended a lot younger, that didn't help matters for an older artist like Faith Hill. Coupled with the bro country boom and the club era, and suddenly it's 2017 and Faith Hill hasn't released a non-Christmas album since 2005. Regardless who you are in the industry, very few, if any, mainstream acts can be out of the spotlight for that long, but Faith Hill was going to make a valiant effort anyways, and with Tim McGraw providing his cosign, they went on tour as a couple this year, husband gallantly trying to revive more of his wife's nascent career. And yet, I had friends and family who were not music critics and who were fans of theirs who went to those shows, and their reviews were shockingly negative, that the performances were underwhelming and unpolished, that Faith Hill's hits hadn't exactly lingered in the public consciousness in the same ways Tim McGraw's had, and she wasn't doing really a good job bringing them back. And thus I had some serious misgivings about covering their collaborative album, The Rest of Our Life, because Speak to a Girl had only been kind of okay, really kind of mediocre, and just like her husband, Faith Hill never really wrote her own material. At least Laurie McKenna was back to contributing co-writing credits to 2 songs here, but also so was Ed Sheeran and Meghan Trainor, so I wasn't sure this is gonna stick the landing for a pop country record. So, okay, how did it go? Alright, look. I wish I could say this was passable. Tim McGraw left his very promising critical resurgence on Big Machine to go to Arista Nashville to help push this album. The couple produced the majority of it themselves, and you could tell that they're trying to frame this as a labor of love. Even if I could walk away from this saying this could work conceivably for an older, more adult contemporary leaning demographic, I'd be reasonably happy with that. But the weird thing is that The Rest of Our Life stumbles even in that category, hitting that awkward gray zone where it's too milquetoast to really be captivating music, but too clumsily assembled to be outright boring. There's kind of some weird stuff going on here. And here's the thing, again, I get what this album is trying to do. I understand its appeal. A real-life married couple who are coming together in the anodyne, placid contentment that will soundtrack plenty of middle-aged, middle-class family dinners. A soundtrack that neither artist wrote, but surely we could get past that, right? Well, again, I've got no problem with the intentions. Where the issues come are in the execution, and we need to start off with Tim McGraw and Faith Hill as singers. Now, I'll get into the messy vocal production in a second here, but the first thing that comes up is how Tim McGraw and Faith Hill are not really at their prime as singers. Hell, with every unnecessary quiver on Speak to a Girl, I could have called that issue months ago, but that also leads to some vocal arrangements that just don't complement each other all that well. At her best, Faith Hill was a belter. Her best songs had arrangements that took advantage of her very big, clear tones and knew how to balance her out with some real subtlety. Tim McGraw, meanwhile, he played to a much looser, more conversational style of writing in country music, never having the same range but making up for it with personality and relatable charisma. Trying to meshing these styles together, and you're gonna run into some problems. You're probably gonna try to meet in the middle and water both sides down, especially when their vocal registers don't exactly lead to some compatible harmonies, which forces Faith Hill to underplay near her lower register, which does not really sound good, and Tim McGraw to go for a falsetto on songs like the title track where, okay, he's trying, I'll give him that. On top of that, they don't exactly have great vocal chemistry here either, which is definitely a problem when they're trying to sell a loose sex song like The Bed We Made, and it sounds completely unbelievable. Granted, if Tim McGraw or Faith Hill had bothered to write any of their own songs on this album, maybe there would have been more of a chance of capturing some of that chemistry, but that takes us to the lyrics. And here's the thing for a record like this. You want to capture the intimacy. The entire crux and appeal of a record like this is capturing the real relationship on display. So maybe it's not a remotely good thing when I can immediately tell very quickly who the backing songwriters are behind some of these tunes, which puts a serious crack in a lot of the immersion of convincing yourself that this couple are telling their story. Now, for comparison's sake, let's go back to that Courtney Patton and Jason Eady collaborative record that I reviewed way back at the beginning of 2017, Something Together. They had the benefit of having similar styles of writing and performance, sure, but what gave that record so much punch was the feeling that even if they were not writing about their own relationship, and God, I hope they weren't in some cases, the emotions behind the song were informed by their marriage and their real experiences. Whereas for this record, you get a song like Cowboy, Lullaby, where Tim McGraw seems more enamored by the moon and a horse than of Faith Hill herself. And then you have the hook where they go off to ride together that feels somewhat perfunctory. It doesn't really fit in with the rest of the verses of this song. And that's not counting tracks like the title track, where even if you can buy into the sentiment of growing old together and having kids that they name in the song, the level of detail and the style of phrasing of Tim McGraw talking about his waistline growing, it makes it abundantly clear that Ed Sheeran co-wrote this, is the sort of detail that he would bring, and that's the sort of detail that's not really welcome. It feels awkward. And while I might like the details that Lori McKenna injects into The Bed We Made, it's nothing on the songs that make it feel more lived in and mature from her record from last year, like We Were Cool, where the homespun maturity had organic texture and history, where the consequences lingered and they stuck with you in this relationship. And her additions to the complicated relationship on Damn Good at Holding On, they just don't stick nearly as well. And that lack of defined stakes hurts song like Break First, where it's clear there was some history between the couple before they hook up within the bar, but what there is so muddy and indistinct that there's no edge or real tension to that possible hookup. Or Love Me to Lie, where it seems to be trying to romanticize the partner lying about his cheating because he's trying to spare her feelings without any hint of sarcasm, a situation that can only exist outside of any sort of grounded reality. It doesn't work here. But really, outside of some of those lyrical issues, the overall sound of the album is fine, right? Well, this is the strangest part of this conversation for me, because not only does some of the vocal layering and production feel pretty damn sloppy, only Dan Huff's work on Love Me to Lie gives Faith Hill the space that she probably needs, and that's not a good song to use it. Most of the rest of the vocal layering can feel oddly muddy or clashing with the higher guitar tones, but the production as a whole is all over the place on this album. There is often a decent melodic foundation contained in some of the piano or the electric guitar or the pedal steel at the core of these songs, but very little, if any, of it can properly cultivate a sense of intimacy or organic warmth of tone, with an easy example coming in the fizzy electronic effects all around the instrumentation on Telluride, especially on the bridge. Why it's there, what it contributes to the song, I don't think anybody can properly tell you or explain. In fact, more of these songs seem to want to default to the spacious, brittle tones that Dierks Bentley was pushing more on his album Black a year ago in 2016, which wasn't really a bad idea there, because most of that record was reflecting on lonely self-exploration, not this sort of intimacy which might require some closer organic tone. Hell, even most of Tim McGraw's typical warmer tones, they would have worked on this album, but much more of this production wants to be an updated pop country sound for Faith Hill, complete with a fair few drum patterns that you cannot remotely convince me are real, or those high wheedling tones on Sleeping in the Stars that would have more of a place on a space rock record than on a country album. Now, you know what? That's not saying that we can't get some decent enough country moments, albeit kind of bland ones. I like the main acoustic line on Cowboy Cowboy Lullaby, even if that song does really drag in the outro. The main piano melody behind the title track, that's good too. And even the pluckier banjo on Damn Good at Holding On, that was alright against the simmer of organ and the interesting guitar tones. But then you have the final 3 songs on this record, they show up and everything just goes right off the rails. Starting with the organ-driven stab at country blues of Devil Calling Me Home. I'm sorry, it does not fit the album's central ideas or themes. It sounds like nothing that either artist has ever made. It's got nowhere close to the edge that it needs to pull off this sort of blues rock, and with every listen, that bridge reveals more bad production decisions. It's a total mess. And after Speak to a Girl, which I've already talked about on Billboard Breakdown and I'm still not much of a fan of, especially in the vocal production, we get this bouncy attempt at beach-inflected country funk on Roll the Dice that feels painfully awkward for everyone involved, with awfully thin vocal production complete with the auto-tune, sloppy horn layering, and can you tell that Meghan Trainor wrote this song? You can certainly tell with some of the production here. It's an utterly baffling decision to end the album like this on every level, especially lyrically, when the sentiment is just to roll the dice on love. Is that what Tim McGraw and Faith Hill wanted to convey coming out of a record banking on the intimacy and style of their relationship? But as a whole, look, again, I get what they were trying to do for this in principle, but it's clear that at some point this became less about providing a solid relationship portrait with any sort of maturity and restraint, and more about attempting to restart Faith Hill's career with material that is nowhere close to her best at her peak, including some truly baffling tangents that could only really come from 2 artists that have the agency to make inexplicable pivots whenever they want, and nobody with a good sense to tell them to stop. And while I appreciate good intentions, and the risk it probably was for Tim McGraw to leave Big Machine to make this album, when you consider how many records these artists have sold, and net worth estimations are around $145 million, it's hard not to see some of this miscalculation is just a pure vanity project. So no, I cannot endorse this. It's getting a 4 out of 10 and no recommendation from me. Again, it's got too many weird choices to be smooth background music, like say like a Blake Shelton's most recent project, and yet it's way too polished and tepid to really earn any of them. I'd say if you're morbidly curious, have a listen, but otherwise, no, there are much better albums to listen to, much better things to do. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I'm a little surprised how long this review went on, but you need some context to understand. I think a lot of people will have forgotten about Faith Hill one way or the other, especially more if you're not familiar with that scene in pop country in the late 90s, which I think a lot of people have pretty much forgotten about outside of Shania Twain. But beyond that, if you want to buy the record, links in the description below, and I got the poll up there for all you to tell me how wrong I am that I really came down hard on this album. I'm sorry, vanity project. I'm sorry, album. Beyond that, if you guys want to support my channel or get more involved in my scheduling process, link to my Patreon is right over there, where 3 times a week you guys get to vote on my schedule, and once a week for the higher tier contributors, you guys get to add albums, movies, or even a top 10 list to that schedule. More details right there, but till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.